the story about Bailey, there are actually several YouTube videos that kind of followed him through the whole process from middle school through high school, and talked about how his accessible educational materials were used, and they're really cool. So back up one. What is AIM? As it said in the video, it's accessible educational materials in a specialized format of curricular content that can be used by and with learners who are unable to read or use standard print materials. You're going to hear me go back and forth on this a few times because just within the last few months, a huge initiative has been added to this grant or to this funding federal source, and they're going to change it, the definition to say learners who are unable to read or use standard print or digital materials, which just took this huge initiative of how do we make all textbooks and all print curriculum accessible to all of the students with these varying disabilities, to now we need to also be thinking about all of the digital materials that we're using. How are those? Are we making sure those are fully accessible underneath this initiative? So as it said, what is Braille? Or what is AIM? It's Braille, large print, audio, and digital text. It has to be exactly the same information as the printed materials. It's only the presentation of the printed material that's different. So AIM is not the same as alternative materials, which address the same educational goals, but they modify that content, typically to make it less complex. Alternative materials may still need to be provided in specialized formats. So if I have 3 students in my classroom and one of them has dyslexia and they're not able to read from the textbook that I've handed them, they can comprehend. They have all of the literacy and understanding and abilities to use that textbook. They just can't read the print. Then I'm going to provide them with accessible educational materials. If I have another student in that classroom that has cognitive impairment and they need that same curriculum, but they need it brought down a few levels for them, then that's alternative materials. It's not the same. So I got the question from Kathy, how do we get modified text for LD students with reading difficulties, say in 8th grade science? I am going to show you that in just a second. So what is AIM? It's designed or enhanced in a way that makes everything usable by the widest possible range of students, variably, I can't even talk tonight, it's been a long day, regardless of the formats, whether it's print, graphical, audio, or video. The technology that delivers that content must be accessible to the person who is using it. So you can kind of see how UDL, assistive technology, and accessible educational materials can really have a crossover, how they meet in the middle, and once they meet in the middle and we're able to provide all of them for a student, they can change everything when it comes to a student's behavior, their attitude, how they're succeeding within the school. The key is to get all 3 of them lined up perfectly. So some statutory connection to it, provisions within the IDEA of 2004 require state and local education agencies to ensure that textbooks and related core instructional materials are provided to students with print disabilities in specialized formats in a timely manner. And I underline that timely manner, and I say it over and over and over when I talk about AIM and accessible educational materials. Because if a teacher calls us in April, or let's say February, and has had a student in her class since the beginning of the year that has a vision impairment or has documented print disability like dyslexia, and they just now are calling to get the book, that's not acceptable. They need to be calling us in April for next year. And we do a lot of hand-holding. We do a lot of not just helping the teacher, but helping if the school has a curriculum department, when they need to pick out what kind of textbooks they're going to purchase for the next year. We can help them with that purchase order and what to say on it to make sure that they are going to get accessible educational materials given to them by the vendor. So by whoever the publisher is, we can help that school get the accessible educational materials. We just need to make sure we do it as soon as possible. So who needs AIM? We talked about students who have vision impairments, students with reading disabilities, students with physical disabilities. So if they have cerebral palsy or muscular dystrophy or anything, and they can't pick up their books because of a documented physical disability, then they would qualify for accessible educational materials. So it's really any student who is below grade level in reading should be considered for accessible educational materials. Now it does come down to some qualifications on where we can access those textbooks, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute. So some student indicators for AIM. First, does the student have a sensory, physical, or cognitive disability that impacts the ability to perceive or use standard materials? Second, can the student understand text when it is read aloud but has difficulty reading on their own? And third, is there evidence that the student cannot read or use grade-level print-based materials at a sufficient rate and with adequate comprehension to complete academic tasks with success relative to same-age peers? And lastly, does the student have difficulty reading independently at grade level or across environments and tasks? So those are some really important indicators to kind of red flags to know those students may need accessible educational materials. Print disability. This is a very controversial, I guess you'd say, term. The language appeared in IDA, but it was never specifically defined. And so in general usage, it refers to being unable to read or use standard print materials because of a disability. So those specialized formats, again, they're embossed digital braille, large print, audio. When we talk about digital text, we're talking about a term called DAISY, Digital Accessible Information System. We can also be talking about HTML ebooks, EPUB files. They can be Word documents, or they can be accessible PDFs, and I'm going to show you guys what the difference between an accessible PDF is and not. So Braille embossed, it looks like a very large printer if you've never seen it, and it makes a tactile type of reading and writing with raised dot patterns for letters, numbers, and punctuation marks. Quite a steep learning curve. It's not something where you just stick the book on the printer and it prints it out in Braille. There's several steps to being able to print something out in Braille. So some considerations to think of. When we talk about accessible instructional material, you have to always remember this. Just keep thinking about this. Can that student follow along with the class? So when the teacher says, turn to page 24 in your science book, does everyone land in the same place? The student that has no visual impairment can open up their textbook and they're on page 24, and the student that's using Braille or tactile type book, do they turn their page to page 24 and still land in the exact same place as the other students? A consideration is Braille books are large. Can the student manage those books in that size? Another one somebody else had mentioned earlier about a student that uses a Braille typewriter, basically. This is a refreshable Braille unit by a company. It's one of probably our very favorite companies to use is HIMS. And what's really cool is it's smaller than an iPad. It's Bluetooth. So whatever is on the screen, let's say you open up a book on the iPad and it's Bluetooth to this refreshable Braille unit, then they can read or finger read exactly what's on the screen. The other thing that they can do then is they can take notes. There are some of these that even can go as far as you can do Facebook, you can do Instagram, Twitter, you name it. They are just like a computer in the student's hands. So there are several different types of these, and we have a few. There's quite a bit of a learning curve to using them, but there's a huge learning curve for those of us that are not visually impaired, but handing one to a Braille student is amazing because they just start going crazy. Everybody's birthday is tomorrow. They just start going crazy on it and love it. Then the next thing is large print. Remember, large print equals a very large book. So keep that in mind when we're talking about those students. We want the portability, the usability, and really important is the durability. They're going to throw these devices, they're going to throw these books, whatever it is, in their backpack, just like all the other students. So it is something that teams really need to consider. If you're going to buy a handheld video magnifier that costs $1,500, then that's going to go in someone's backpack. Okay, let me stop for just a second and answer some of these questions. Jessica, is the JAWS program still used for computer use for those with visual impairments to help them use a computer? Yes, it is. There are a few other less expensive options out there. Because I always tell people JAWS, it has a learning curve that will give you whiplash. It takes a good year to learn how to use it, so it's a little bit much for someone. There are some others out there. And then I have a student who could use a magnifier too. He has a tablet and has to put it right up to his face to read it. Yeah. Call ATLA. I know this place that has some great magnifiers. Okay, so I'm going to go on. The next thing is, can the student follow along with the class? Again, if you're going to go with large print, when the teacher says turn to page 24, does everyone land in the same place? And then that audio format, we got to remember the portability, usability, and durability. So if we do an audio format of a book, we get an audio version. Let's say we are talking to a great publisher that will send an accessible audio version for a student, then what kind of tool are we going to put it on? Are we putting it on their iPhone? Are we putting it on an iPad? Can they only use it at school on that one computer? These are all considerations to think of. And then with the audio format, they still need to be able to navigate to the same page 24 when they're in that science class. Who will pay for the devices in the classroom? The school. So digital text it's in an electronic format. It can be delivered via a computer or other device, and it can be transformed into different ways depending on what the student needs and the technology being used. So I'm going to show you guys. Kathy, you're distracting me. Yes, there lies the problem. So it can be used to display content in several different ways. So I'm going to show you guys how that is. It's okay, Kathy. I should make a bumper sticker that says that. So digital text, the other thing is it should have various features that can be changed depending on the technology used to access it. Size, font, color, contrast, highlighting, and if you're going to use digital text, it definitely should have that text-to-speech part in it. So I'm not sure if anybody's heard of this. There was a university in Arizona a few years ago that decided to go all digital with all of the freshmen. They were doing a one-to-one with the freshmen in this university. And so instead of getting textbooks, each of the freshmen, incoming freshmen, received a Kindle, and this was mandated. There wasn't an option for students. Either you go get the books or you get a Kindle. It was a Kindle, and every student had to have it, and that's where they downloaded their textbooks and their information to. Within the first week, a student that was blind started school, freshman, and the Kindle at that time was completely inaccessible to blind and visually impaired. At that time, there was no text-to-speech. The contrast and highlighting was really poor. There were several different things that it just was, in comparison to some of the other devices on the market, wasn't even close. But it was cheap, so this university went with it. They were slapped with a huge multi-million-dollar lawsuit from the National Federation for Blind because of it. So we really need to be careful on what device we use, and that it is accessible to the students, especially if a school is going to mandate, or a college is going to mandate, that all students use that same device. So digital versus accessible. The way to tell if it's quote-unquote real text is, can you highlight, copy, and paste it? So when you're on your iPad, can you touch the text and it will highlight it, and then you have the option to copy and paste it? Then that is real text. It's digital, or it's accessible text. So many things, it's text, you see it on the digital device, but it doesn't mean it's accessible. It just means that it's text. It's a flat image, just like taking a picture with your iPhone of the menu at McDonald's. You're not going to be able to touch those words and have it read back to you. That's not accessible text. That's just a digital picture of the text. So it's something important to consider. So some selection process, some checkpoints when you're thinking about a student and you're like, boy, I heard this lady one night talking in my class about accessible educational materials. Here are some things to consider. List the print materials that are used across the curriculum. Consider the instructional context in which they're used. Select which formats the student needs, and determine which materials are needed in those selected formats. So does the student, I had a teacher call me at the beginning of the year from one of our rural districts, and I mean, big kudos to her. She knew within a few weeks she had a student that she knew she needed to get accessible educational materials for. And so we were able to get the book in an accessible format for the student, but she forgot about the worksheets and all the handouts and all the extra information that the students still needed to have in an accessible format. So we really need to sit and think about all that stuff before we move forward on getting accessible educational materials. You want to make sure you encapsulate and have all their materials, including the digital ones, in an accessible format. Then selection of those formats, the team again determines which specialized formats will be most useful to their students. Sometimes more than one may be needed and selected, so sometimes a student, let's say that's blind and visually impaired, will need some of their materials in Braille and some of it in an audio format. That's something that really having that AT evaluation helps quite a bit to figure out what we're going to use and what technology is needed for that. Okay.